Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! Those are fireworks.
I gotta say, 2023, I don't like the ring of it.
I don't love the ring of it. 2022 seemed fake. I kept thinking it was 2021. And then once June hit, I thought it was 2023. So I'm not loving this year number.
Yeah, it feels like a in-betweensies. 24? Now that's a real
That's
round
gonna be
number.
crazy. I'm telling you, 2024 is going to be the new 2020. It is going to be a psycho year. But it's like, to me, I have the feeling I'm like, let's get fucking through this thing already. You know what I'm saying? Like 2023, I don't care about it. Like, nothing's going to happen. Or like I'm saying,
let's slow it all down. It's going too fast.
Let's do 2022, maybe 6 more months.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, do you have a New Year's resolution? It's okay if you don't.
I don't.
You don't?
I don't. No. I didn't think of anything.
Mine is I'm going to lose 200 pounds.
Interesting.
Yes, I'm going to actually be sort of a negative weight in the world, and sort of like I'm picturing like the way I want to look by summer, or like even by spring. I want to be just like a sphere in the air that sort of sucks, like has a gravity to it, but like sucks like a black hole.
Yeah, basically. You want to be a black hole.
Yeah, I want to be a black hole. So I have started taking a diabetes-related drug, to lose weight.
Ozempic.
Fentanyl.
By the way, I heard that there's a new diet drug coming out that is like makes Ozempic look like running a 5K. Like really? It is so fast, and like people are like, it is going to completely change everything. More so than Ozempic.
Out there in Miami, Ozempic was talk of the town.
Yeah, no one can stop talking about Ozempic and buccal fat.
Okay.
Is that how you say it?
Buccal? I never heard of this before last week. Buccal fat?
I only knew about it with the massage. The French buccal massage is very famous. However, here's what I'm going to say. All the Tumblerinas are all saying, buccal fat removal, that's an out.
It's an out? Well, here's my thing. In an out list, you're not going to do any of that. None of that's you know what you're gonna do?
It's just like direct to consumer trend spotting.
You're gonna look at your phone for the next year and then be like, "Oh, I should have done more with my life." That's what you're gonna do this year. You're not gonna like be like in dinner with friends. You're not gonna do that. Yeah, you're gonna order takeout. And you're gonna sit there and you're gonna watch a little fucking The Queen's Gambit.
I think TikTok is gonna fall off. That's my.
You just made. I could tell by your tone of voice. You just came up with. You think TikTok's gonna fall off this year?
No, I didn't just come up with that. I've been fucking thinking about that for like 3 weeks.
Oh, how come you saved it for the show?
I don't know, because we never talked about it. Also, you don't like when I make predictions.
That's true. That's because I think it's witchcraft.
Hello, everyone. I'm Liz.
My name is Brace. We are, of course, joined by producer Young Chomsky in the podcast.
It's called TrueAnon.
Hello. We have quite the interview for you guys to start off the new year. And I figured we would add a little context to it before we start, because it's a little bit complicated. And as we learned from our Utah series, sometimes you need to constantly restate things so that people don't forget. I feel like pretty easy to remember information. But we have with us today David Safran. He is, I would call him an investigative journalist, freelance reporter. And he's done a lot of work specifically around the disappearances, I guess I would say, of 3 kids from Running Springs in California from the CEDU facility. That's John Inman in 1993, Blake Pursley in 1994, and Daniel Ewan in 2004. CEDU, for those of you who listen to our series, The Game, stood for, it's believed, Charles E. Diedrich University, and was a youth school modeled directly after Synanon. 3 children disappeared from there over a 10-year period. and none of them have ever been found. And David wrote an article about the San Bernardino Sheriffs Department's essential cover-up of the case, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the piece is called "Are Police Stifling the Investigation into 3 Teens Who Vanished from a Controversial Residential Treatment Facility?" And we're linking to the piece. We highly recommend you guys check it out before, during, and after the interview. And David, of course, brings his own experience with CEDU to his investigation. And so we talk about all of those things in this interview, which is coming up now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year. We are back with a bang, and we have with us today David Safran, a freelance journalist and local rock and roll musician from Chicago, Illinois. He's written under the name Medium Anonymous. I have been reading his work for a long time. He has helped us out on this show, and we finally have him on to talk about, well, a variety of things. But for those of you who remember our 5-part miniseries, The Game, that came out, I mean, you would have to remember because that was literally like a month and a half ago. David helped out with that, and he also has written quite a lot about these schools. He attended one himself, and we have him on to talk about quite a few things today. David, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
So, let's just jump right into it. A little bit of background. You went to CEDU, which is really related to the school that I went to as well, and which itself came out of Synanon. But would you be able to give us a little context to what CEDU is? Because just to situate us in what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid it's going to take about 12 hours to kind of dissect CEDU. It was functioning for decades as a sort of a rehab commune hybrid, an artificial society. It was for the first 3 decades, really. It was based in Southern California, and it stayed there for most of its existence. But it developed also into Idaho too, which I think is kind of where Monarch emerged out of. That kind of the Sandpoint Abyss, that northern Idaho culture. I was in the mothership, in Running Springs, California. That was CEDU HQ. Pretty much, since I think they moved to Running Springs to the mountains in the late 60s. But at that point, it was, before then, it was really in Riverside County and also Palm Springs. And it was sort of scattered about, functioning under the radar, mostly as a nonprofit, trying to lure in adolescents. But they had members that were, the ages ranged from 12 to like 40. And eventually they changed from a nonprofit to a for-profit. And they were licensed in 92 as a group home, which changed pretty much everything for CEDU, especially in California when it became a group home. Of course, they didn't advertise that it was a group home. They called it a school. Although, whether it was an actual school is very debatable. That was just like a marketing hook. Although I think they believed that they were offering an alternative education. Certainly, Dan Earl would say that.
When you say that everything changed when it reclassified itself as a group home, what do you mean exactly?
I know a number of things. One, they opened themselves up to they had to get licensed through the California Department of Social Services. So, and their community care licensing division, particularly. So when they were for 3 decades, they were operating in this kind of gray nonprofit rehab world. So there wasn't a lot of state scrutiny. So in 92, when they changed the license, which was in part, for profit, because they could then open up a middle school. And they could enroll. I think their under their license, they were allowed to bring in kids as young as 9.5. So for them, it was a financial thing, but unfortunately, their ways of operating, they weren't accustomed to having like licensing analysts making last minute inspections.
Yeah.
So then that became a different issue for them as they opened themselves up to being regulated, really. Because when everyone talks about the troubled teen industry, you very often hear that this is an unregulated industry.
Right.
In CEDU's case, from 92 to 2005, at least, that wasn't the case at all. They were being like vigorously inspected, and abuses were noted all the time.
And yet it remained open.
It remained open. And that was the thing that, when I was doing my initial investigation, the thing that really shocked me the most. Because I assumed that, they were just still operating under the radar and getting away with their violations. And then I said, wait a sec, they're getting type A citations left and right, things that would revoke or suspend a license, and they were just kind of flagrantly beating it, every time.
It really reminds me because, I mean, for those of you who remember, I think it's episode 3 and episode 4 where we talk about CEDU in the game series. CEDU does come out of Synanon, and Synanon had, especially in its early years, a sort of running battle with regulators of basically every stripe. I mean, from city planning commissions to the police, to health department or California Department of Health, and sort of found themselves bouncing from place to place until they could get it basically as secluded as they could while still being able to sort of leech off a major metropolitan area up in the North Bay. And it's funny because CEDU, which to me always is sort of like the main youth sort of outgrowth of Synanon. I mean, Mel Wasserman, the founder, had some kind of relationship with Synanon. It doesn't seem like he was a drug addict or anything, but he had certainly gone there and learned some things. And then they added Bill Lane, like a long time Synanon guy who basically designed the program. But CEDU sort of runs a similar path. And at first they open up in Palm Springs, and they have these sort of Riverside, Palm Springs, sort of desert California. And then they move up to this really secluded area in the San Bernardino Mountains. And I'm actually, I'm from California. I've actually not spent a lot of time in that part of California.
You're lucky.
Liz and I have talked about this before, but I'm freaked out by two kinds of folk. One of which is river folk, and the other which is mountain folk. Yeah,
and they're a related type of folk.
They're like cousins. They're cousin folk. Yeah.
What about if you have a river folk or rivers in the mountain?
That's
a dangerous combination.
That's sort of running springs.
Yeah. And so you. They move there, and then they open up, and it seems like almost they decide to go somewhere more secluded for all of their other schools that they open, which would be Idaho. But you went to the Running Springs campus. You actually went to CEDU yourself.
I did, yeah.
What can you tell me about that? What's the circumstances?
I want to talk about that. I want to back up though, because Synanon also was, investigated all the time.
Totally. Yes.
So was CEDU, though, in its own way when it first opened, to the point where CEDU was getting worse media coverage than Synanon in the mid to late 60s. Yeah, they were forced to move to Running Springs because there was a raid, and there was headline after headline. Allegations of orgies and brainwashing and bad food. The community they were in Riverside County despised the CEDU program. They thought it was, and this wasn't like a get off my lawn incompatibility. I mean, there were a lot of investigative civilians and very, very concerned parents that were seeing their kids drop out and go to these sensitivity sessions in the CEDU family. They were called a family back then. And Mel Wasserman considered himself the father.
Sort of bad connotations with the Manson stuff there.
Exactly. That's a really good point. There were so many allegations of this sex orgy thing that like early members had to go on a local TV program or radio program or something to defend themselves and say, this is not, we don't just have orgies here, we're doing more than that.
Yeah, not just.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Those had significantly faded into the background by my tenure.
Yeah. But what's so weird about all this is that all the negative coverage, the raid, it was a health department thing too, the raid, that they were, they got in by saying, they weren't up to code, their ranch compound. But they also brought the portable crime lab with them. I mean, it was a real, obviously, mid to late 60s, Southern California, there's a cult on every corner. I mean, but this was a particularly insidious one. I think some of the parents were, they're organizing campaigns to shut it down. They were trying to eradicate it, and they referred to CEDU as a plague. So, why then cut 30 years later, parents were like enthusiastically sending their children to this place. Like, how come they didn't go to their public library and look at all the old articles? Or, I mean, how did this get missed if it was so apparent?
Well, how did it?
Yeah, how did that transformation happen?
I mean, that's an excellent question. I don't know if that can be answered easily. I don't know if I can answer that. I certainly think that CEDU was excellent at marketing and changing language. Mel Wasserman was, I guess, in a way, I think Brace and I have heard this a lot about, this kind of the idea of the Synanon spin-off. But for me, I think of Mel Wasserman as sort of the Ray Kroc of Synanon, where he didn't just take like the duplicatable bits and like bring it out into the mainstream. He really took Synanon and he made it safe and digestible, sort of.
Yeah.
He was bringing in all the key players, and he wasn't getting pushback. Chuck Dietrich wasn't trying to have him killed or anything like that. I mean, it was a real brotherly sibling kind of relationship, from my understanding.
Well, that's what's sort of so fascinating about it, because, with Synanon had, similar to CEDU, a lot of people who left early, splittees, they'd call them.
Yeah.
And Chuck hated them. I mean, he despised every single one of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys left and started their own, or started working at other rehabs, which did try to do like the Ray Kroc. They tried to basically mass market Synanon, like, Daytop here. I mean, just all over the country. These guys would take what they had learned at Synanon and open up their own places. And, Chuck would rage about them, publicly and privately. And what's so notable about Synanon about CEDU's relationship with Synanon is that CEDU basically did a similar thing where they took large swaths of the Synanon program and under a completely different leadership structure, Chuck, they were not paying Chuck Dietrich, marketed this thing. And Chuck, I can't find any negative relationship about them or any private correspondence that Chuck sent, talking shit about CEDU or anything like that. And CEDU took prominent members like Bill Lane from Synanon and had him there designing the program, which was really just, again, largely Synanon.
Yeah.
And it's so strange because it really is only it's like basically the only really official successor that you will find. And it's hard to call it a successor because, it started during Synanon's, sort of the waning parts of Synanon's late heyday for Synanon.
Was it? I don't think it was waning though. I mean, in 1966, 67, it was really, and they were also, Mel was really leaning into Hollywood too. He was seeing that you could kind of lure celebrities, and you see this too. I mean, there was like a charity baseball game with the Monkees and Alice Cooper.
I cannot believe Alice Cooper did that.
Yeah, I had heard I'd heard a rumor from someone who was there that Alice Cooper then played a little concert at CEDU in the main lodge. His music was, out of agreement. You weren't actually allowed to hear it. But here he was anyway doing a concert, and he was drunk, from what I was told, in a rehab. I mean, at that point, it was not like this emotional growth or sensitive kids with depression. It was like just a cutthroat rehabilitation center, and he's drunk. That's just gossip. Who knows if that's true? But that's what I heard.
It's funny you say that, because the thing about it being a rehab and then sort of later becoming a place for both kids who have maybe issues with addiction, but also for kids who just have like depression or some sort of vague psychological category that they're put in. That I think is the real transformation of both CEDU and the industry as a whole, coming from this 1960s like fear of juvenile delinquency or fear of like everybody falling into drugs to really this like 1990s, like my kid has unfortunately he has ADD and anxiety, and we need to put him in this program, which is going to exacerbate both of those things, but hopefully by the end he'll be cured by that. To me, it seems like CEDU and the industry as a whole really adapted to change with the, I guess the popular struggles in parenting. I don't know how to put that, but like the popular sort of psychological or like juvenile issues of the day, which really did transform from being primarily about drugs and like teen rebellion to being about depression or mental issues, but also drugs as well. But I think drugs really seen as like an out. That's how they were really treated at Monarch, as an outgrowth of psychological issues.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened was, and again, it's so hard to distill this, but from my understanding, the major change, especially with CEDU, and I think Mel Wasserman is viewed, at least within this kind of smaller industry, as having revolutionized a kind of alternative education that became acceptable. So what they did was they blobified into like special education.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that I think about this all the time. Bill Lane was running a transport agency. While he actually started, while he was at CEDU, he started escorting kids from one CEDU program to another, and then transport became this huge like subcategory of the so-called troubled teen industry. It was mainstream enough, though, for his transport company to have a vendor's table at a very dry special ed academic conference that was put on by the state here in Illinois. I mean, Illinois really propped up the troubled teen industry, and has for decades. You can, it's some of these programs are, if you send your kid out of state, it's at the taxpayer's expense, which is
really,
it's really overlooked. And I think every state has some variation of this. But if your kid, has an IEP and you're not satisfied with public school, you can talk about other placements, and you can get the state to pay for residential treatment out of state. I worked on a big report that came out a couple of years ago, and it was NPR Illinois, and I was the source for that. And I did an interview too, and it really I wish it had gotten more attention, because once regular folk realize that that they're paying for this bullshit, you think that maybe there would be an end to it, but there hasn't really been. I mean, the pandemic changed enrollments, but it's still a business, and So my point here is that you're up against an alien invasion, except like the aliens are all quoting John Dewey, and that's kind of where we're at now. It's like they are within special ed, and special ed's a broad category. So your kid may have depression, but he could be receiving special education treatment for it. And if that isn't working in your public school, well, then maybe there's a place for, a therapy camp or whatever, this nice little place in Utah or whatever, or Northern Idaho. So it really, a lot of things haven't changed since I was there, since you were there, you know.
Well, let's get into that because I think we've been kind of circling around this. I mean, at the heart of all of your investigations and journalistic work into this industry, including the piece in the LA Magazine, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is your own experience at one of these facilities. And I'm wondering if you can, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about that and, you know, how that kind of informed your work today.
Yeah, I mean, I was shipped off. I was a freshman in high school. Mm-hmm. I was shipped off in January. I guess it was, you know, this is January. Not that long, you know, in some ways. But yeah, I was shipped off in January of '99. And I did not do the full 2-year term. I was pulled and I went right back to public high school. So I was at CEDU for about, I think it was like 15 or 16 months, which is still a long time.
That is a long time.
So I mean, my enrollment, I don't want to kind of go on too much of a digression, but there was a family in Chicagoland. They're called the Swibels. Influential family, Howard Swibel and Cheryl Swibel. And they were running a foundation, the Friends of CEDU Foundation. Massively influential in recruiting kids. And more important, they were really proselytizing the CEDU education. And it was such a hard sell, Howard Swibel, to my family, that my dad still remembers it. He remembers it more than, you know, actually like sending me off. It was, you know, it was this, the Swibel family are notorious and a very political family. Howard Swibel's dad was the chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Oh, God.
Long tenured. I mean, the Swibels kind of created modern Chicago. And I think my family was enamored with the Swibels, particularly my father. They were kind of in this rarefied, dinner-jacketed world, not where my mom's an elementary school teacher, and my dad, he was selling seasonal products. I mean, he wasn't, you know, this wasn't that much of an affluent background. We were doing okay, but, you know, it wasn't the Swibels.
Yeah.
And the Swibels were brilliant at selling this idea of family reunification, that you need to like go out of state to get close with your family.
Yeah.
And they had a profound impact on this idea of like the CEDU parent education, which was this other component that was far more successful. So I think my own parents were concerned with my behavior at the time. I was getting more depressed. I was loaded up on antidepressants, which I thought were ugly and insidious, and I wanted off of. Mm-hmm. I thought they were causing more problems than needed. But my parents were worried nonetheless, and they weren't looking for residential treatment. It's not like they wanted to send me anywhere out of state. CEDU was the only place they had heard of, the only place they looked at. And even then they thought it was a giant leap to like send this freshman in high school who's kind of moody and spiky and defiant a little bit, not terribly, but also getting really good grades. I mean, I wasn't like truant or any of that. So what happened was, you know, by pure unluck, the Swibels were my aunt and uncle's neighbor. And I'm not close with my aunt and uncle. My parents weren't particularly close with my aunt and uncle. They make, let's put this into context. My aunt and uncle, they make like Roger Ailes seem like Studs Terkel. I mean,
good God,
they're far right. I'm estranged from them. my parents are basically estranged from them too.
Yeah, yeah.
But they were but my aunt and uncle far right were really close with the Swibels, and the Swibels just kind of volunteered to show up at my parents' house with this pitch for CEDU, and they had heard of it, and it was a therapist that I was seeing who also loved CEDU. He's this old hippie therapist, this deadhead who had great success sending other kids to CEDU and happened to have a VHS and a brochure. It was this kind of, but he was also really close with the Swibels, and it was all this real kind of web of bullshit that I sort of saw through, but my parents couldn't. And it was really the Swibels' pitch at reunification. My dad called Howard Swibel a messiah of hope. And all of it was bullshit, all of it. And I'm actually quite close with the son that they were using, the son that went to CEDU. He did do the full term. And they used him in all of their marketing. They said that, if it weren't for, they named him, he was just part of their story for the Friends of CEDU Foundation, which was also founded by, they founded Howard and Cheryl, but they then brought in a guy named Joel Horowitz, who was, part of I think it was Tommy Hilfiger or something like that. We should fact check that, but he was part of that kind of branding machine,
Yes, yeah.
So I mean, later on their own kid was referring to CEDU as an institutionalized cult. That was his phrase. But his parents were using his story as a success story. He was the poster boy for CEDU, for the Friends of CEDU Foundation. And they were hiring up a lot of ex-Synanon people for the foundation. And they changed their name to the Friends and Families of Children in Crisis after CEDU kind of closed down. And they did the same thing, but across the entire industry.
It's funny, like that same pitch, I think, is used on so many different parents by so many different, whether it's individual educational consultants or therapists or something like this. But like it's essentially this promise for family reunification, but this sort of implication there is that, like, well, you're the parents, like you guys are kind of already there, but like your kid is missing, and like, we'll take them away, fix them up, and then you'll start to visit them and you'll see these changes, and they'll come back to you as your old son that you remember from when they were a little 8-year-old boy or something. And it's I know there's some problems with that I can't remember her first name, but the book by Slavitz, Help at Any Cost. But one of the things that I remember when I first one of the things I remember when I first read it that stuck out to me, and that seems so simple and obviously true, was that, like, a lot of kids are kind of fucked up when they're 13 or 14. And then, what happens? They grow up, a couple years go by, and they get things like, and sometimes it's not very fun, and sometimes it doesn't, it's a painful process. But like, if your kid has some depression by the time they're 14, there's a large area between that and then sending them to what is essentially like a group home, and so I'm familiar with your story, but you were sent away, and you were not transported there.
I was not.
You had the I can't actually. It sounds almost more traumatizing. We dropped off by your family, because at least I had some stranger to hate. What were your initial reactions to CEDU? Because in my memory, I had no familiarity with this kind of stuff. I mean, I had been to Wilderness, and so I had sort of like heard rumors and sort of heard these sort of what I thought were tall tales from people. But then to be thrust into this world that is, first of all, totally rural, and then second of all, just filled with really obscure sort of 60s lingo, and all these sort of strange esoteric practices. for me, it was a huge shock. And it was almost like, I remember thinking like, everybody here must be insane except for me, because I seem like I'm the only person who realizes the absurdity of all of this.
Yeah.
And what was your reaction to
I was
the
a
CEDU
startled
program?
contactee. I was like everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like, I also, I mean, what was your move-in process like? Because for me, it was, you're photographed, you get a cavity search,
Exactly
they
the
take away
same
all
as
your
yours.
civilian clothes. I was like this nice suburban kid that had never really, I had no context for what was happening. And then I couldn't get a phone call out, after all that happened, I was like, oh wait, this is a mistake. Let me call my dad. He's still on the mountain. If I can just call the motel and he could pick me up, and then that's it. And they wouldn't let me make a call. So it was just like,
No, that was, I had not at that point after Wilderness, I was like, there's, it's going to be pretty restricted communication here. But, I was sort of shocked. I remember when they told us, because I can't tell you, we had the exact same program basically as you guys. Yeah. And so it was the same thing. I think you guys were allowed one 15-minute phone call every 2 weeks.
Yep.
That's what we got as well. And we did it. The person who sat next to me during that was the son of a director of a CEDU school. And they were ready to essentially pull the plug on a call if you started to talk about your problems with the program. For me, I remember my parents, and the staff told us this, like, we've told your parents that you're going to lie to them and manipulate them. And so to take any negative words that you say with that context, and we're going to let you say as few of those negative words as possible. And so I remember just feeling really trapped and trying to think of like a way to get around that. Like, I was like, well, okay, like I know that like they've taken all these safeguards to where whatever I say that's bad about the program will not be believed. Yeah. And so I have to somehow communicate that. But, I actually never, I eventually changed tact when I realized like I actually had a plan to run away. And so I was like, I became very positive about the program in order to get a home visit so I could make my escape. But I remember trying to figure out how to get around that, and I couldn't. And there's sort of this feeling of like trapped desperation, because even though you get these phone calls with your parents, you are essentially forced to be dishonest.
Yeah.
And communicate something that's not actually true.
Absolutely correct. I can't. Yeah, you nailed it. That's it. I think, for me, it took about 6 months, a good 6 months of trying every conceivable way to get out.
Yeah.
Every embarrassing thing I could think of. I just destroyed myself really for 6 months trying to leave. And then I realized I am going to, because, one of the kind of therapeutic techniques, shall we say, was, forced confession, and also lots of disclosure and storytelling. You're always telling your story over and over and over. So you have all these disclosures swirling around, like everyone's dirt lists, you knew everything. What that also meant is I could ape other kids, and then I could eventually figure out who is the one that has the most privileges, and how can I just become that person. And maybe if I just, appear to be doing the program, I will get more time with my parents, more off-campus visits. I can actually leave home, go return home, have these kind of these 2-day, where you fly back home.
Yeah.
And I did that. So I became a dorm head. I was giving campus tours, because, all the tours had to be done by kids. We were selling the place. We were doing all the groundskeeping. We were doing all the selling of it as well.
It's funny. I think it's in the Medium Anonymous, or in the Running My Anger piece that you wrote. You describe yourself as like a California real estate agent.
Yeah, that's kind of
how you felt.
But that's, it's funny because my mom, that's what she remembers. She took a tour as well, and on her own, and she came back, and what she remembered was that it looked pretty. That's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway from all of these places. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked
woods.
pretty. So yeah, that's right. There's rivers and there's mountains. Your favorite. So, I guess it was, what I'm saying is I looked at the counselors and I stopped seeing them as like the prison guards. I looked at my parents and they were the ones that I needed to appeal to. And once I figured that out, I was pulled not long after. So, it took a while of just being totally stupid and defiant. I was always out of agreement in my own way,
Well, we should explain to the audience, agreements were what they called rules, which is I remember even at the time, I was not the most perceptive 13, 14-year-old in the world. And frankly, I'm not the most perceptive 33-year-old in the world. But I do remember at the time being like, wow, by calling rules agreements, the obvious implication there is that like we're all agreeing to this. And I remember these sort of like childish, defiant arguments that I have. Well, I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, well, okay, you don't agree with this. Then here's your punishment. And I'm like, but you're describing a rule. Yeah. Like an agreement is, as far as my little, teenage head was concerned, something that two people maybe mutually came to an understanding on and agreed upon. Instead, this was a list of rules foisted on you like they would be in any kind of institution.
Yeah.
And being out of agreement at Monarch, at least, could mean anything from digging stumps, which was my most common punishment. I dug out a lot of stumps, including in the winter. In fact, for all of the winter, I dug out stumps. Or to having basically what I guess you would call KP duty, kitchen duty to whatever else, and then eventually getting up to, and this happened to me a couple of times, being on bans from people and not being able to speak to either certain groups of people or to anybody at all.
They called it bans there too.
Yeah. You got which is, it's funny because they really did not update the lingo from CEDU for
yeah, it seems that way. Yeah.
So you have a line in your piece in LA Magazine. You say, in 2015, the 10-year anniversary of CEDU's closure in Running Springs, I realized I'd become more curious than haunted.
Yeah.
And that line really stuck with me when I was reading this piece. That's such an interesting juxtaposition, like curious and haunted. And I think that, our series on Synanon and Brace's experience, which dovetails obviously, as you guys are, illustrating so much with yours, I think kind of walks the line between both, curiosity and a haunting. And there's a way in which I think dealing with these experiences, you're sort of, these like traumatic moments, you're sort of presented with that, not as like a fork, right? But that there's these sort of two, pulls you can feel within yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, what was really pulling you, what the kind of curiosity there was pulling you versus feeling kind of haunted by this experience.
Well, when I returned from CEDU and I went right back into public school, I was leaving CEDU because I was pulled. I was basically shunned from the family, the CEDU family. My peers, I had friends there. But even then, it was I was doing something. I was doing the worst thing you could possibly do because CEDU considered itself, not just a business, but also this. It was a cult.
Same.
Yeah. So my parents were getting it at their end as well. Just this kind of brutal, arrogant, indifferent attitude towards pulling, and that it wouldn't just like break apart the family, but then they're going to wash the CEDU world's going to wash their hands of all the Safrans. You don't exist, and that was a really helpful coping mechanism for me when I returned, because if they didn't find me authentic, then I can say it never happened. So I cut this out of my life completely. And I mean, my normal friends, when I return, they barely ask questions anyway, because they're dopey high school kids. But I could lie and say, I was testing a private school, for a year and a half, and wherever, and no one really asked questions, and my parents weren't pressing me at all. I mean, I was having serious nightmares. I was also trying to get off the meds that I had been on for 3 years or 4 years. So that was my motivation, was to have as normal a life as possible, to return to the life I had previously had, and to get off these dumb fucking meds. That was it. So I cut it out for 15 years, and it was you can't really return to therapy, in my case at least. I went to a place that was trying every possible bullshit self-help. So I'm not going to be affected by normal therapy anyway. So, and I don't, you can't do the thing that triggers you. So I avoided it. Still avoid it. It's just not for me. What I want to do is have a life and experiences outside of this world, and read a lot and make music and, whatever, be as debauched as I could, but in a healthy way. So, and basically to have a life that would be everything CEDU was against.
Yeah.
Just proudly flaunt what they consider destructive and prove that it's not. So I did that for 15 years. I always expected, because CEDU was so influential, this was the thing, this was, the foundation of an entire industry, and its tentacles were everywhere. So I always expected media to do something, especially on a 10th anniversary of its closure, at least in California. I mean, it's still operating in Idaho, and it never happened. And I also kept trying to find, I kept this a secret. I finally told my girlfriend. It was I was in love. I couldn't drag this thing around anymore. I had to tell her. I didn't have the language for it.
Yeah.
So then I started looking around, and the language wasn't there either. There was no comprehensive summing up of the thing. So then I said, all right, I got to do this. That's my curiosity. It's like, how come this hasn't occurred? So I tried, and then I thought I could get a lot of help from editors. And I was, it took 3 years to write this dumb thing, not because it took 3 years of me just like, I was doing a sentence a week. It was because I was, one, I mean, this, you have to, if you're putting in like records requests, you expect something in 3 weeks, and then it arrives like 8 months later.
Yeah.
But I was also sending drafts on spec to editors, thinking naively like someone was going to run this. Someone's going to really want to do a comprehensive retrospective on the thing. And there was some interest, but it was more like I kept pitching and repitching and banging my head against the wall with editors in the media. They just didn't want to do this. So finally, I'd had it 3 years of doing an independent thing. I'm just like, and waiting for, the Guardian to come forward, or someone to just be like, there were two reasons for rejection that I heard over and over and over. And one was, you can't do a first person investigation, that it doesn't work. You're too close to it. And the other was, we don't want to get sued because CEDU may not be in existence anymore, but this is a very litigious, community, and we know it, and we can't afford, our outlet can't afford some kind of frivolous lawsuit, especially if it's a freelancer's work. So I was hearing these things over and over, and I said, fuck this. I'm going to just put it up on Medium, and I'm going to do it anonymously, not because I care about being sued necessarily, but because I don't want this story to be about me. Yeah. I want to use my story to underscore, or push back on some kind of claim that I know isn't true. But beyond that, this isn't about me. Mm-hmm. So I did it,
Well, you were able to use kind of your I guess it's 3 years work into like investigating into CEDU, you were able to kind of use that not as a jumping off point or I mean that makes its way really into like the hands of actual investigators, police investigators. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean that. Well, you mean the actual investigation that I was consulting on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those to put this in a little more context, you're talking about the running my anger piece. That's like
Yeah,
this
that was
really
the piece. It was medium anonymous. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it was medium anonymous is a joke. I mean, it was because I'm posting on Medium and I'm
anonymously.
anonymous.
Just to put that into context for me, that was the first piece that I had read as somebody who went to one of these schools, somebody who went to a school that was almost exactly the same as your school. That was the first thing that I had ever encountered that was like, oh, this is my experience. Like that piece just for me actually really helped me to give me the language to like think about this stuff, because I had the same experience coming home and like I ran away and sort of I had, we talk about that in a previous, for listeners, we talked about that in a previous episode called Brat Camp that was not part of the game series, but that was I tried not to think about it for a really long time, and then it came up and it came up and it came up, and I finally read that piece and I was like, this is the language. But yeah, I mean,
I'm so glad. I mean, that really, that makes me very happy, because that's what I wanted. Like these kids to read this and just, instead of having a conversation with the parents, they could just like send the link and say, you read this and then we'll talk.
I did. Yeah. But like Liz said, that actually ended up in the hands of a deputy at the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Detective, excuse me.
Yeah.
And well, that deserves a little bit of unpacking. First of all, why would a detective at the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department in 2021 be looking up CEDU at all? A school that closed at Running Springs, at least in 2005.
I mean, the short answer is that there are 3 missing persons cases still open, never solved, that occurred on campus. 3 kids, all boys, 93, 94, and 2004. And they've never properly been investigated at all. So a new detective, newly promoted detective named Alicia Rosa, was assigned to the Twin Peaks station, which is the small...
The Twin Peaks station.
Yes, the aptly named Twin Peaks station. In Twin Peaks, it's in the San Bernardino Mountains. It's one of the many small mountain communities that make up that particular area, but it's part of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. So she was basically, what she was doing is she was going through all the missing persons accounts in the region. And then she was kind of shocked to see there was 3 that occurred in the same location, which is rare. So she revived them. It's not like she reopened these cases. Like, they were open. They just were inactive. And then she started looking up CEDU, and she found my article, and she found my work credible. I've done other things besides that article. And she asked me to consult on her investigation. That was November 2021. And not long after, her investigation shut down somehow by her superiors. To date, there's a giant question mark about whether that investigation is even happening. It was taken up by homicide cold case unjustifiably. The detective is not permitted to work these, to assist on her own, cases, essentially. There's a lot of questions swirling about how the Twin Peaks station handled or mishandled these cases, and CEDU in general. I mean, the numbers, they knew all the dark doings that were happening, inside CEDU for decades. Basic stuff like, call logs even tell the story of how they flagrantly ignored runaways, AWOLs. I mean, the numbers are extraordinary. The calls they were getting, rather, what I'm saying is, they're getting hundreds and hundreds of calls about runaways, and they were not investigating. They were not searching. They were not doing area checks. Just completely washing their hands of anything having to do with this place for a number of reasons.
Yeah, what do you think those reasons are?
Well, I think one has to do with just, CEDU, the area was, it was sort of a company town. I mean, CEDU employed everyone. The town doctor was also the medical director for CEDU. His wife was, spouses were working in this place. It was
this is exactly how it was at Monarch in the town, in the little town that we were
and
in.
exactly how it is. When you were in Sandpoint, I mean, it was this, you were in CEDU country. I mean,
that is CEDU country through and through. I mean, they were at one point the biggest employer in Bonner County.
That's right. Yeah. And it was the same thing with, and I think it was like, Lake Arrowhead skiing and CEDU. And that was like, those were your, it was such an economic hub for that particular area. And they were CEDU. Oh man. I mean, I think at a certain point they realized that putting a snake in the mailbox is not going to be successful. You need like a cease and desist. Yeah. So they started really, I mean, they would sue detectives who were not just detectives. They would sue law enforcement officials looking into wrongdoing. They would file complaints against deputies that were getting a little too close. They consider themselves a self-policing institution, CEDU, and they hire their own private detectives, which they called escorts, and largely the local mountain cops tolerated that. These are out-of-state kids. We don't want to get sued by a thuggish, brutal kind of Roy Cohn-esque program that could take us on. And so CEDU just co-opted the town, co-opted everything.
It's funny too, like, for instance, I ran away from Monarch twice, actually. I ran away after about a week there. I ran through the woods, and then I successfully ran about a year later. And I remember thinking, like, well, if I run, when I did run, I was actually caught by staff, but they called the police, and I'm a 14-year-old kid, and if I told the police, like, hey, I'm at this insane cult, like they are making us do all this weird shit, like they're not. My parents sent me here. I don't know what's going on. What they would do is they wouldn't investigate anything I said. They would just send me right back there.
Yeah,
and that's the case with all these places. Like the police aren't there to like. You can't call the police if you are beaten at one of these programs. There's no way you can call the police. And if you do call the police, no one's going to fucking jail. You know what I mean? Like you have you have less rights in one of these programs than you would in
you have no rights.
You have no rights.
Prison.
Yeah, you said actually I can't.
You're stripped of all your personal rights. Yeah. So I have a question for you though. Did you get the option of like getting 5150'd? Because usually, if the cops picked you up, in Running Springs, you have a choice. You can go back to this tripped out treatment center that you're struggling to escape from, or you could go to either a juvenile detention center, or you go to the hospital, to get 5150 treatment. And a lot of kids opted off mountain because you can get access to a payphone.
Yeah. No, I was caught by staff, so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But
for
I
other kids,
absolutely chosen 5150. Are you crazy? Yeah. If
right.
you're ever in a situation like that, choose the second location, motherfucker. Do not go back to the original location because the future is unwritten. So you could who knows? Maybe you can escape from the nut house.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny. Like the relationship that the police have with these programs is so opposite from the relationship that the police initially both had with CEDU and had with Synanon, in that they were really like, there'd be these raids, they'd come down on them.
Yeah.
And then at the end, by the 1990s, I mean, they were essentially functioning as like ancillary employees in some cases. And like you
Yeah.
said, yeah, like they were very litigious. You mentioned there's this one sheriff's deputy, Charles Wyatt,
Yeah.
and you post his logs here too. And I mean, some of these are sort of astounding. I mean, 220 on this. In 2004, Charles Wyatt was investigating a rape he believed occurred, but received no cooperation from the CEDU staff. Two CEDU staff members told Charles Wyatt that CEDU was not required to make reports to CPS or law enforcement, and they disagreed with mandatory reporting requirements.
Yeah, those were depositions that were taken for Daniel Ewan's case, so that they occurred after CEDU was closed, and Wyatt ended up he's deceased, but he ended up a crime reporter. He had left the sheriff's department, and he was writing for the Mountain News. He's also responsible for bringing in a DOJ consultant in 2009 to investigate the possibility of a serial killer, James Lee Crummell, and the other two missing kids, which I think was very misguided and has had a kind of a negative impact on wanting to investigate these cases.
Well, let's talk about these kids really quickly.
Sure.
There's like you said, there's three of them. Two from the 90s, John Inman and Blake Pursley.
Yeah.
And then from 2004, Daniel Ewan.
Yeah.
And so can you I mean, runaways are pretty common or splittees are pretty common at these kind of places. It's a sort of natural reaction. You get taken to somewhere that's you think is insane. And, if you're a sane person, you want to leave there.
Yeah.
Most of the time kids are caught by somebody in some capacity. And again, like you said, either returned there or returned, sometimes very rarely returned home. Most of the time returned to the facility. But in these three cases, none of these kids were ever found. And like you said, the cases were still open. I mean, can you tell us the circumstances of these kids disappearing?
Yeah, I mean, John Inman is the most mysterious. He just, and there's a lot of what I should say before I even, start talking about this is that there's nothing but conflicting accounts here on all of them.
Yeah.
And many discrepancies, and nothing adds up. And especially with Daniel Ewan's case, I'm writing a follow-up now about it. And I've been, helping his parents coming up on 5 years, and nothing makes sense. There's like maybe a line or two in a deposition. I'm like, oh yeah, well, that's possible. And then everything else is just kind of fantasy. And that's a strategy too. One of the agreements at CEDU, which we have it's an archived like rule book essentially. And one of them is no snitching.
Yeah.
So, it's the code of the streets is, how they describe it there is, no snitching. So,
by the way, that's no snitching outside. You snitch
to be
inside.
Clear. Snitch inside.
You have to snitch inside.
That's it was the code of the streets. Don't snitch to, outsiders. Yeah. So I can't really tell you. I know that, all three disappeared under mysterious circumstances. John Inman, he claimed he was just, from the little we know, he wanted to get out and he ran.
Yeah.
Blake Pursley had severe developmental disabilities and a leg length discrepancy and walked with a limp and couldn't run. And yet somehow he outran adult staffers and disappeared into the night. Yet at the same time, from what I was told from an eyewitness, he was at the middle school. Middle school kids were always monitored. So he was just en route from one building to another. And then he disappeared, this kid. Daniel Ewan, you ask me anything. I have no idea. The missing persons report that we just obtained, interestingly enough, the deputy who was clearly a little bored, identified Daniel Ewan as suspect number 1, and the reporting party a counselor and his suspicious story, he's labeled a victim. So if that tells you anything about, if it sums up the relationship between the mountain cops and CEDU, I think that's it. It's like the person who possibly lied to law enforcement is a victim, and the kid who's trying to escape institutional child abuse is a suspect number one.
Yeah, the title of your piece is "Are Police Stifling the Investigation into 3 Teens Who Vanished from a Controversial Residential Treatment Facility?"
Yeah.
And I hate the I
didn't come up with that title.
No, I don't mean I hate it. I'm saying, I think it's, the core, the crux of your piece is pretty obvious, which is yes, at almost every turn, from not just, the in the immediate aftermath of their disappearance and the just immediate reporting, which, we could talk about how long it took for any of that to actually happen in each of the cases, but then through the years following, and then, afterwards, as reinvestigations or the cases were allegedly tried to be kind of reopened up, right?
Yeah. I've never consulted on a police investigation before. Mm-hmm. I try to avoid police.
Yeah, me too.
I'm an old Chicago punk rocker. I'm not, they're not my friends. Yeah. So I did it. I happen to like Alicia Rosa, the detective. I find her passion and her enthusiasm just such a stark difference between everything I've encountered with police in these cases.
Well, it's sometimes it's such a we talked about this before, but when you have, even as an adult, when you have another adult being like, oh my God,
right,
that's insane. You're like, it's a very validating thing to hear from an adult, especially someone in a position of authority.
Absolutely. It was the first time all this work, all the repercussions that went along with this work, the cost of it, the emotional cost, the health cost, all of it felt worth it consulting on this investigation. Mm-hmm. And then to see it fall apart, to get shut down, and then to see, Daniel Ewan's parents hopeful again and then just crushed again by an impenetrable amateurish sheriff's department. I'm still reeling from it. I don't. None of it makes any sense to me, and at the same time, it really kind of does make sense. Just knowing that you have a police department that just cannot, for whatever reason, admit its errors. And in order to solve these cases, the sheriff's department has to admit its own wrongdoing and its limitations and its endless failures with CEDU. So you have an institution that, it's this huge sheriff's department, and all they want to do is they want to ensure their reputation is as intact as possible. You can't do it in these cases. So you got to bury them. And where do you bury them? You bury them in the homicide department, where they're absolutely, there's no evidence that these are even homicides. Why are they there?
Yeah, that was sort of my next question there, is why are they in the homicide department?
Because that's where you can bury a case. That's where you can make it cold. There's a huge difference between a cold case and an open case.
Yeah.
You can make it cold by claiming there's a lack of evidence. You could put it in a drawer. You can give it an H number, which means it's blocked. From my understanding, it's blocked from outside divisions working on it, and that's it. And there you go. So you can take it from a missing persons detective and lock it away in an elite unit that's always overworked anyway. You can make sure that it's not prioritized, and you can call it a day. And that's where we're at now with these 3 CEDU cases. So, unless people are vocal enough and the pressure is so overwhelming, they're going to get away with it. And they are, so far. I'm saying this not as some sort of conspiratorial guy, just kind of rip my hair out here. I'm speaking as someone who was asked to assist in an investigation and then watch that investigation completely collapse.
Well, that's what's sort of so astounding about it, is that 2 of these cases are from 1993 and 1994.
Right.
2021 is when you start consulting on it.
Yep.
And obviously, I mean, from what you seem to describe, this detective, noticed that these 3 kids disappeared from the same place. She's looking into it. She is bringing in outside consultants to actually help and really do a proper job on this for the first time.
Yeah, she had TrueAnon approved. She got approval for an outside agency that is reputable to do this, not just some guy, like.
And then it's yanked from her and then shunted off to a drawer where it cannot be worked on.
Yeah.
And then she's forbidden from speaking to the press and speaking to you, even as a person.
That's right. And admonished for requesting the cases back when it became clear they were not being prioritized. She asked for them back. And, I was just texting with her a couple of days ago because I wanted, the missing persons report that we got for Daniel Ewan. I wanted to know how much was redacted versus, what she saw. And, she had to remind me, she doesn't have this stuff. It's just, it was all her files are now in a different, they're down the mountain. So, I don't really know.
At the end of the day, like what we're talking about here is not like it's 3 missing. I mean, in some cases for 3 decades missing.
Yeah.
Missing kids, possibly dead, very possibly dead. That there's just like was absolutely. I mean, that is just like it's sort of extraordinary to think about that. Like 3 very possible deaths, and however that might have occurred, or missing whatever, from a single place, just totally not looked on. And you mentioned earlier the call logs to the sheriff's department. I mean, there's almost 1,000 calls about CEDU, like you said.
That's in 8 years. That's
exactly.
I mean, they won't even give up the ones before 97.
I know. And something else you mentioned in the article is like, there's 1,000 calls from 97 to 2005. Yeah. And before that, the sheriff's department is claiming that they have no records due to a system switch.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. Software upgrade. Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand what would happen. So all the records are gone?
I think it's in the piece. It's because they keep all their records in an iPhone, and they just, just got lost. Yeah, got lost. Sorry, that's right. Yeah, they can't get it.
I mean, it's
bullshit. Sort of, by the way, I mean, it's all bullshit because when I was consulting on the case, I was looking at reports from earlier than 97. So why can't you say this is public information?
I mean, I guess just from my perspective, like, there is a quote conspiracy going on here. And I'm not saying it's like a conspiracy where like children are being abducted and, their adrenochrome is being taken out or whatever. No, it's like there's a group of people who at the very least want to cover up the fact that they essentially bungled any sort of investigation, whether it's a search and rescue operation or an actual like investigation into like a.
Well, they didn't search for John Inman, and they didn't search for Daniel Ewan, and Daniel Ewan's parents had to threaten to complain, file a misconduct complaint to allegedly have the sheriff's department do an area check. And then I asked Wayne Ewan, well, do you have any proof that they actually did it weeks later? And he said, no. So this is all happening. They're in Jersey. Their kid goes missing 3,000 miles away. CEDU immediately instructed the parents to hire one of their escorts, Keith Raymond, to search for Daniel. So on top of their own tuition costs, now they're paying for CEDU. They initiated the runaway services agreement for CEDU. Bill Lane had a hand in this too. I mean, this is kind of his thing, where it's this additional fee. So you're paying, I mean, it's a huge, huge conflict of interest, but his parents are frantic. They're desperate. They don't understand what's happening. They're very confused. So they do that. And Keith Raymond comes on the scene with his wife. They claim to look for Daniel. They can't find him on campus. Next thing you know, he's conveniently in San Diego. There's sightings. They claim that there's bloodhounds that they brought to the San Diego park. They're picking up his scent.
I know that's fucking fake.
Well, I mean, they do not only that, but then he reappears in late 2018, 2019, not long after I was introduced to the UNs, Keith Raymond, who's had no apparently any dialogue with the UNs for over a decade, he reappears. He says he's sickly. He's trying to understand this case. It's on his mind. He wants to know if there's been any leads in the last decade plus. Next thing you know, weeks later, this do-gooder with no agenda happens to get a voicemail. It's Daniel. No, I'm sorry. This is where it gets very tricky. He claimed at first that the voicemail came from like an anonymous caller saying Daniel's alive. He doesn't want to be found. In the missing persons report, he changes that to there's a supplemental report in 2019 that was added. He was interviewed by a reporting officer, and he claims it was a psychic that called Keith Raymond saying Daniel's alive. And then Raymond further amends that in a podcast we did a year later, and he says it's Daniel himself. Nevertheless, Raymond goes back to the San Diego park, and wouldn't you know, he claims like 5 minutes being in the park, he speaks to someone who had just seen Daniel Ewan. This gets picked up by media. It becomes a sort of where's at-risk Waldo for San Diego. All the local ABC News is covering this. It really just becomes mainstream. And at this point, I mean, you have, I think it was the director of communications for NCMEC, the national, the main missing persons organization.
Yeah.
She does a segment on Court TV, which is a Daniel Ewan friendly tabloidy outlet.
Yeah. Yes, I'm familiar with Court TV.
Yeah, no, I know you are. No, I know you are. I'm saying that but it's Daniel. It's like Daniel Ewan centric. They do so many segments on Daniel Ewan. So she appears, the director of communications, and she, it was a moment where finally someone could challenge this really dubious, decades-long sort of sightings of this guy, and she leans into it, and she says, there's all these, we believe he was there after CEDU, she kind of reinforces Keith Raymond's claims that maybe now he's alive still and has a family in San Diego. What's happened is we've just become this. The story of Daniel Ewan is now. It's so complicated because his parents believe he's in San Diego, and they've been led to believe this, and it's also given. This has helped. The Sheriff's Department not investigate. I mean, even in the missing persons report, in the original one of 2004, the deputy twice mentions that the parents have hired a private detective.
Yeah.
Why bother? Why bother looking into a CEDU case if the parents they're doing their own thing? And if people are claiming he's alive, even better.
I mean, that's I get, from my perspective, obviously I know less about this than you. It's like that seems unlikely to me that he would be in San Diego with a family and just have been totally under the radar this entire time. Obviously, this goes without saying. Actually, I'm going to say it, but that detective's fucking lying. That is the. To me, that's a huge crock of shit.
You mean Keith Raymond? I mean, Keith Raymond is a serial liar. I can say that
of course,
without question. I mean, everything he said to me, everything he's said under oath in the Daniel Ewan case is questionable. He gets numbers wrong all the time, and also he's a CEDU employee. And every time we tried to press him, he became, he claimed he was very sickly. He didn't even show up when the Ewans flew out to San Diego in 2019 to follow up on his leads with him. And then when we were doing the Lost Kids podcast, he said he was basically dying and he couldn't even talk to us.
Yeah.
So, Detective Rosa, when she was working the investigation, she did track him down, and that was, that was a rare moment where someone could finally press Raymond.
Yeah.
And then, what do you know? The case is gone.
He's still alive?
As far as I know, yeah.
Because he was dying when you did that podcast.
Yeah. He was dying
a
also
while ago.
He's
just been. I guess by those metrics, I'm dying right now. But yeah, I mean that's sort of what's so heartbreaking about this, because I've heard interviews with the Ewans, and I can't imagine the feeling of like sending your kid to this place that turns out to be a pretty different place than maybe even somebody with not the rosiest goggles might see it as, and then your kid disappearing, and then every single person who should be helping you with this, from the sheriffs to the staff at the school to the private detective that they have you hire, is fucking lying to you and misleading you and pointing you in exploiting you, right? And ripping you off for fucking money.
Yeah.
While your kid is somewhere, I don't know where, but
and he was only there for less than 2 weeks. So we're not talking about my 16 months or whatever. I mean, he was there for no time at all. And throughout that time, he was, from everything I know, profoundly traumatized and silent, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
He was not, doesn't appear he was making a lot of friends. I think for me, what really helped was making friends. And also, I kind of viewed CEDU as the West Campus of my public high school, because there were just so many fucking kids from Chicagoland. And
really,
I'm talking, like I had a friend who saw my punk band at Fireside Bowl or wherever it was, or some venue. So like, it was, we were all there together, and that profoundly changed my own enrollment and confinement. Was friends, and I don't think Daniel was able to get that luxury.
Yeah.
And then he vanished. And then what's really, I've been going through these, the depositions for years now, and it's the narrative the counselor told the deputy who responded to the call is so different than the narratives, that we learned about the, circumstances, alleged circumstances, from testimony, and it hasn't been made public yet. Most of it, but the narratives are crazy. I mean, one kid. Let me back up. The narrative that the counselor Stephen Kravchuk told the deputy was that Daniel walked off to buy cigarettes. That was it. He just kind of huffily left to get some smokes. And that was taken as fact. So in the missing persons report, it says that the probable destinations, quote unquote, probable destinations, were a gas station or Arrow Bear, a neighboring town. A lot of questions with that one. One, the first thing is Daniel had never been in Running Springs before. He'd never been in the San Bernardino Mountains.
He doesn't know where the fuck the town is.
Exactly. Like his entire perspective is CEDU's facility. Cigarettes were forbidden. I'm sure it was like that at Monarch too.
Yeah, of course. You can't leave to go buy a cigarette. I mean, I was at Monarch in 2004.
Yeah.
Same program as CEDU.
Yeah.
We were not allowed to go buy. You know what I would do is I would roll up toilet paper in the fucking porta potty outside the classroom, and I would pretend to smoke cigarettes.
I think I did that too. Yeah.
You were definitely not allowed. But you were definitely not allowed to. No, I mean that's absurd. That's like me saying I'm going to Mars or something. If
right, that's exactly what it was. It's going to Mars. So there was no whatsoever follow up, because the deputy just, it's Sunday morning, didn't want to go to CEDU anyway, probably, and he took the report and moved on. None of that made any sense. They also didn't check. So it's, all these probable destinations weren't actually investigated. So,
okay. Yeah. So what's the point of fucking taking them?
Right. So, well, I mean, what's the point of even taking this report if Daniel Ewan is listed as the suspect and the reporting party is the victim? So the narratives that are coming from, the in-house narratives that are being pulled based off depositions in the civil case that the Ewans launched against CEDU. And at the time that this was launched, all the San Diego sightings had already emerged. So, they kind of weren't maybe asking the right questions. The lawyers were concluding things that, for me, make me want to, bang my head against the wall.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, there are these dueling narratives about what happened to Daniel. One guy says he was, sweeping next to him in the backside of campus. It's mountain perched, so it's just it's cliffside. Here's your main lodge. Here's the mountain. They're sweeping in the back of the campus, and Daniel disappears. Which, short of wrapping yourself in an invisibility cloak and jumping on a helicopter, probably unlikely. And yet, that's it. So there's another version of the escape narrative. Then there's another one that says, at the time of his disappearance, Daniel was being monitored 24/7 by an escort, another resident, because he was non-complying with everything. So they had him being monitored all the time. So
they would do that to kids of mine too.
Exactly. Yeah, they did. So in a free moment where he was unmonitored, Daniel bolted, and another kid saw him fleeing, tackled him, and he was restrained by a kid until a staffer could bring him, to the dorms. He hauled him off to the dorms for some indefinite amount of time, and then the kid who restrained him testified that he saw Daniel that day, like throughout that Sunday. If even half accurate, that would have meant the deputy was taking down his report for a runaway juvenile with the runaway juvenile still on campus. Yeah. That also raises a number of other questions about restraint, because I don't know how it was at Monarch, but kids weren't really supposed to be restrained, especially the high school aged kids. Like they CEDU prided itself on not doing restraint.
They did restraint at Monarch.
Did they?
Yeah, but there just wasn't really like that many kids getting them.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. But were kids restraining other kids?
No, you were definitely
Right.
you were. Actually, I did see that happen once with this kid Daryl, but it wasn't supposed to happen.
Wasn't supposed to. Yeah, right. So
it was kind of just a kid got beat up.
Yeah. Well, it's a little different than
Yeah.
Some random teens seeing Daniel fleeing and feeling like he needed to do something, and he restrained him.
Yeah.
So, all these things conflict. They make very little sense. And no one followed up on them. No one put anyone under polygraph, not like polygraphs really can amount to much, but still, like, there was no official investigation or looking into false narratives or any of this stuff, really, until Detective Rosa launched these cases. And as soon as she started doing that, you know the rest.
Yeah.
In so many ways, I think your piece in LA Magazine mirrors some of, I don't want to speak for you, Brace, but I'm going to speak for you. Or not for you, but at you. Or describe you, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
You have my permission to do all three.
But I think that your piece in LA Magazine, kind of serving as this culmination in so many ways of this, your own personal investigation, your curiosity, as you put it, at your own experience. And of course, then how that, intersects, dovetails, met in the middle with the disappearance and the cover up of these kids from these CEDU facilities. And I think, for Brace, like, something that we talked about off air a lot was the kind of lack of, as much as you're kind of going into these investigations and kind of putting yourself in the middle of it, and how that can, like you say, come with, its own baggage in a lot of ways, right? That the idea of like closure from any of this, I think, is a little bit too Hallmarkian, if I may, that like something like this can serve as a kind of closure. At the end of it, you say like, there's nothing to be done and I can't do this alone.
Right.
And I think that serves as a good kind of, kind of guiding light a little bit. But I'm wondering like how you feel at the end of all of this, kind of throwing yourself in the middle of it, and, what's come from it.
That's an excellent question, and I don't know if I can answer that in any intelligent way. I believe that these are solvable cases, and I believe it's going to take, you guys, people that care and are outside of law enforcement to make actual breakthroughs, serious developments that could then push law enforcement to act.
Yeah.
But it's going to take us. I mean, that's kind of it. And it's possible. So if we don't care,
Yeah.
it's just going to be sitting in a drawer in San Bernardino County for the rest of time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the piece is incredible. We'll
Thank you.
Link to it, obviously, and your other pieces on Medium. It's
I
just.
mean, I think that last episode we were trying to talk to Patrick. That was incredible. I mean, that was really. I just wanted to give you guys a hug. Actually, I wanted to be in that car with you on the stakeout.
We had talked. I think like the day before.
We were talking. No, you were texting while you were there. You sent me that crazy CED.
Oh yes.
The photo.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I gotta tell for listeners, behind the curtain, David was a big help, not only just in information wise, but also just like talking about that stuff, because it can be hard. It can be hard to like to have the language for it.
You had the language, and that voicemail was. I mean, that was. I've wanted so many times to say that.
I was gonna say, like, have you spoken to anybody who was there? Like,
I certainly have. No one remembers me. I mean, some of the kids remember me, but like staff, who the fuck is this guy? I mean, I spoke with Mel's widow. I mean, I've gotten to the top. Bill Lane was supposed to. He died in 2018, 2019. He blew me off, and he took my questions and he sent them to Lon Woodbury, who's kind of a notorious figure in the so-called troubled teen industry.
All of our pictures, not all of our, but several of our pictures of Patrick comes from the Woodbury website.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I remember seeing that too when you were posting things. And they did a kind of like Trump Hannity thing, the two of them with my questions. Anyway, I mean, I've spoken. For me, though, you said something interesting in that last episode where you kind of wanted to humiliate Patrick a little bit.
Yeah,
I understand that. I totally understand that. I don't know if it would work, and I don't know if that's my style. When I try to interview these people. I'm not trying to do a gotcha. They're already got. I mean, like I really want to understand extremism. I want to understand how extremism can get infected in the educational system, the American educational system. I'm fascinated by this. So I'm more fascinated by why is Bill Lane and Associates at a vendor's table, or why do they believe that this was an alternative education? What made them think this way? So that's the fascination, that's the curiosity. But the anger for me is actually more at state agencies. So, when I'm going through thousands of pages from California Department of Social Services and they're substantiating abuse allegations, and then I go to their office and I say, I would like to speak with the licensing evaluator who is making these reports, and I'm told, oh, they don't know anything about CEDU. And then I look at the name of the person that was writing those reports, and it's the same person that's overseeing the Riverside office. So then I try and contact that person, and she doesn't speak with the public. So that's my rage is with the state institutions that were aware of these abuses and allowing them to occur and coddling them and tolerating them. So that's my focus, really. So I was maybe the worst person to end up consulting on a police investigation, and then watches it, fell apart, because now I'm going to continue looking into that law enforcement agency.
But maybe that's actually the reason why you were the best person to be involved in the end.
I will
say depends on who is listening.
Well, certainly for the victims, I think you're definitely the best person to be consulting on something like that.
Well, I thank you very much for that. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate your time and your kindness. I don't often get a lot of kindness when I'm doing this stuff.
Well, so. I'm glad. I mean, I've been, I'm thrilled to have you on. You said you were working on a follow-up to this piece about the missing persons report.
Yeah, I'm working. Yeah, I have that going on. It's longer than I expected, and it's specifically about Daniel Ewan's case. I don't know when that's going to be out. He went missing in February, so we're coming in 2004, and he was shipped off in late January, 5 years after me. So we're hitting some real anniversaries. So maybe it'll coincide the piece with that. And I have a long piece that is on Medium that I haven't posted yet about obtaining the CEDU archive.
Yeah, you've told me that story. So
that's a story for another day. But
it's a wild story though.
It's a wild story. I never actually expected this to become essentially a part-time job. Running My Anger was supposed to be a one-off. And then I've moved on, and they keep pulling me back in. So I'll keep going.
David, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to link to all that stuff in the episode description here, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. There's a lot of stuff in the LA Mag article we didn't even get to. There's then that I got to tell you, that Running My Anger piece. If that I would just say that is like essential reading for anybody interested in this topic whatsoever. It's really good. And David, it's been a pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
Definitely. Thanks, guys. It was great to see you.
Well, we'll definitely have links to all of David's pieces in the show notes. And if you guys haven't checked out our series, The Game, The Story of Synanon, we're going to link to that as well, because it's all available for free now. We've got a link to all the episodes, and all of that will provide more context for a lot of the stuff we were talking about here today.
Well, with that, I am Brace.
I'm Liz. We are, of course, as always, joined by producer Young Chomsky. And this has been TrueAnon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.